We currently have 62 Warframes that we can choose from, which is a lot. But there is one frame that has flown under the radar for quite some time, and I barely ever see her in public lobbies. And that is the one and only Banshee. According to DE's official records, throughout 2023 to 2024, base Banshee was only used by about 0.10% of the player base on average, with her prime version coming in at roughly 0.25%. Which is mind-boggling to me because she is such a damage powerhouse that can very easily make most weapons into truly disgusting instruments of destruction. And the best part is she requires very little investment to actually accomplish this and is brutally simple to play. So in this video, we are going to see exactly why you should consider giving Banshee the love she deserves. Without further ado, let us begin. Banshee's passive silences both your and your robotic companion's weapon fire, which is great for situations where you need stealth, but for most instances it's just there. Now we get to her first ability, Sonic Boom. Sonic Boom emits a shockwave that pushes enemies in its range away from you and deals impact damage on hit, with enough force to incapacitate or kill attackers, with 50 base impact damage. Wow. This ability sends enemies flying in all directions and pretty far as well. You could, however, use it to push enemies off of ledges, so there is that, but it won't affect enemies if Banshee does not have direct line of sight, so keep that in mind. At face value, in the current state of Warframe, it's not that great of an ability. In most cases, we want enemies to be grouped up, except for very niche circumstances, of course. What Sonic Boom is good for, however, is shield gating on Banshee, which I find that she absolutely does need to keep alive, as a breath of wind can take her out. But we'll talk about that more in the build. Sonic Boom is also a really good panic button if you find yourself being overwhelmed and need to get enemies out of your face in a hurry. Simply pop Sonic Boom and remind them of social distancing. This brings us to Sonic Boom's augment, Sonic Fracture. Sonic Fracture allows Sonic Boom to armor strip enemies, and with enough range it can armor strip quite a large number of enemies per cast. So if you don't have any sort of armor stripping in your build or in your team, this can potentially be a great augment to take. However, in the current state of Warframe, there are so many ways to armor strip enemies, and even then, building your weapons with some heat and corrosive coupled with Banshee's sonar ability is often way more than enough. For solo play, it could work, but for team play, you can get away with not using it, as there is a good chance one of your teammates will have some way to armor strip beefier targets, like acolytes. Then we move on to her second ability, Sonar. Now this is the skill that turns Banshee and her teammates into damage powerhouses. Sonar sends out a sound wave that, once it reaches an enemy, will highlight one of their body parts, which then becomes a critical weak point to shoot at for both you and your team. Shooting at these weak points will then multiply the damage dealt, which is directly affected by ability strength. It's important to note though that even though they are worded as critical weak spots, they're not enemy weak points as we generally understand them. They are in a class of their own. So if you are using things like primary crux or anything that requires weak point hits to proc, killing enemies via sonar weak points will not trigger them. For that, you will need to hit and or kill them in the traditional weak point zones, like a headshot, for example. Recasting sonar causes more weak points to be highlighted on enemies, generally on either the head, the torso, or the limbs. If a body part is then highlighted, shooting at the highlight will affect the entire limb. And these multiple instances of sonar highlights can overlap, which further multiplies the damage dealt. While on that note, hitting the sonar highlights will only affect the direct damage that you deal to them and not the status procs. By status procs, I mean heat, slash, and toxin. Electricity and gas are still affected by the damage multiplier. The damage multiplier from sonar also extends to Warframe abilities from both you and your allies, as long as they hit the correct body part, of course. As for the number of highlights that you can have, the same body part can be highlighted up to 2 times for most enemies. with the exception of some non-humanoid enemies, like this little shit, the Anatomizer, which can stack more than 2 sonar highlights per body part. Speaking of stacking sonar highlights, Sonar's Augment, Resonance makes spreading our sonar highlights significantly easier. Slotting this puppy into the build will result in us triggering another sonar pulse each time an enemy is killed via their sonar weak points. These additional sonar pulses will then have 100% of the remaining duration on the ability. So as you and your allies kill enemies, you can keep propagating Sonar's weak points all over for those juicy damage overlaps, which makes this mod a must-have in pretty much every Banshee build. Oh, and consider making your energy color something that is easy for everyone to see. It will make it much simpler to see Sonar's weak points that way. Next we have Banshee's third ability and also her subsume, Silence. Silence surrounds Banshee with an aura that deafens enemies in a radius and also stuns them for 2 seconds when they initially enter the aura's range. This can be repeated as they enter in and out of the aura range, which can be quite an effective CC and will help keep you alive. Against overguarded targets, however, Silence won't affect them as they are CC immune. It's also important to note that despite its name, Silence will not change your weapon's noise level from alarming to silent, which is something her passive will do. What it does do, however, is deafen you as well as your enemies. Enemies that are within your Silence aura will not react to the sound of gunfire, but they can still react if they see you though. So in stealth situations, it will come in handy, or if you are doing the Silence leveling method, which I'll cover in its own video. Silence's Augment, Savage Silence, will cause Silence to stagger enemies, opening them up to finisher attacks and then increasing said finisher attack damage. In regular play, this augment isn't strictly necessary for Banshee, but with something like the Silence leveling method, it is a must-have. Finally, we come to her fourth ability, Soundquake. Soundquake is a channeled ability which causes Banshee to send out vibrations that shake the ground around her in a radius, dealing damage per second and then draining energy in the process. It's a nice looking ability, but the fact that it is channeled and you have to sit in one spot to do it is kind of meh. The augment for Sonic Quake, Resonating Quake, will stop this from being a channeled ability. With this augment, Sonic Quake will create a shockwave instead that expands out from its epicenter, that deals up to 20 times more damage at the center and will gradually weaken as the shockwave expands. Using this augment will then enable you to cast this one on the go and also much quicker. Out of all of her abilities though, this is the one that I would recommend we subsume something over, as making use of her sonar is often way more than enough. Alrighty, before we get stuck into the builds, the real question is, where do we actually find the parts for Banshee? Lucky for us, Banshee is really accessible, even to newer players, because you can find all of her parts in the Tenno lab in the dojo, and for pretty cheap too. Or you can just buy her primed set on the market if you have the plat. With all of that out the way, it's time for the builds. For a frame like Banshee, there are a hell of a lot of options to use as subsumed abilities that could work quite well with her base kit. Out of all of the choices that we have available, I found that Wisp's Breach Surge actually feels the most comfortable, which we subsume over her fourth ability, Soundquake. Now, there are 2 reasons why we opted for Breach Surge in this instance. Reason number 1 is that I really wanted to get away from using Gloom on her, even though I was sorely tempted to. Reason number 2 is that Breach Surge synergizes so well with her sonar ability. If we pop in Resonance in our build, both the Breach Surges and the sonars will self-propagate, which is ever so slightly kinder on our fingers. Now, some may call it overkill, but using Breach Surge will add a further damage multiplier that is separate from Banshee's sonar highlights, and because of the nature of the ability, the Breach Surge sparks will seek out other nearby enemies as the targets are killed, working in tandem with our sonar. As for the build itself, this is what I found to be the most comfortable. We are leaning more into strength, which will directly buff our damage multipliers from both sonar and breach surge, with a little bit of range and duration to even things out. You don't necessarily need a ton of range on her, as with 130% range, our sonar can travel as far as 45 meters. Breach surge and silence will be between 23 to 25 meters, which I found is pretty solid. Although if you feel like you really needed some more range, you can absolutely fit that in. Mods wise, we don't have anything too crazy or too complex. That's the best part about Banshee, you don't need crazy investment to make this frame as good as she can be. Now for this build, I did put in Brief Respite along with both Augur Secrets and Augur Reach. This is so we can make use of shield gating, as Banshee has about as much tankiness as a piece of paper. With our efficiency at 45%, we can recover a large amount of shields fairly quickly as we cast our abilities, which we are going to need for higher level play. But we absolutely do need resonance in our build for this to work though. Arcanes wise, again, nothing super fancy. We have Molt Augmented in here for our customary ability strength increase, which I put in here just because. Even without Molt Augmented at 278% ability strength, our sonar weak points will give us a 13.9 times damage multiplier, which will compound with Breach Surge's 5.56 times multiplier. You don't specifically need this arcane to be build enabling, so if you don't have access to this, you can pop in whatever you have, you'll be fine. To give her some extra survivability, I threw in Arcane Aegis to help with shield gating. If you don't have this arcane, you can easily substitute it with something like Molt Efficiency for more duration. That could also work too. If you want some more survivability, or if you find that the shield regen isn't working the way that you want it to, you can get away with swapping out Transient Fortitude for Rolling Guard, as I find that it's usually status effects that are likely to kill you over enemy gunfire, and Rolling Guard will help cancel those out. Or if you can't be bothered with having to roll all the time, Adaptation also works well too. Molt Augmented will then pick up the loss of the ability strength and you're good to go. As for the Archon shards, I settled on using just 3 Crimson shards for some additional duration, with 1 Amber shard for casting speed and another for some parkour velocity, because parkour velocity is amazing for getting around quicker. As for how this build plays, it's nice and easy. Simply pop your sonar, silence and breach surge periodically and just fire away. Having breach surge in here will also add another layer of CC to her kit, because enemies will be blinded as they are struck by the breach surge motes, on top of being stunned when they enter your silence aura. Do keep in mind though that both breach surge and her sonic boom ability need line of sight to work on enemies. If you find yourself getting low, or if your shield depletes, you can simply spam Sonic Boom a couple of times and other abilities and you'll be back up before you know it. Because of how Banshee works, any weapon that you pair her with will turn into an absolute monster. So she can actually help pick up the slack for your favorite weapon if you're still trying to gather all the required mods. Well, except for a few that apparently don't work with her, but for the most part, you'll be more than okay. Just keep in mind that she isn't the tankiest of frames and can get killed easily, just like Sevagoth. Speaking of Sevagoth, let's talk Gloom. Remember I said that I wanted to get away from using Gloom? Gloom is still a phenomenal subsume on Banshee because it acts as an extremely strong CC and general survivability tool, which is really good to use on Banshee if you find yourself dying a lot or just need some more utility. Given that sonar already gives us a stack of damage to whatever we hit enemies with, you could very easily swap out Breach Surge for Gloom and you'll still be fine. At the end of the day, it comes down to what feels good for you to play. The only time Gloom would be a little tricky is when you need to get enemies to a specific location quickly, especially if you have a Nova on your team who is helping to speed up enemies. Using Gloom coupled with Silence will pretty much halt those enemies in their tracks, so I would recommend Gloom for solo play or for specific circumstances. But where Gloom does work very well is when you are using the silence leveling method with yours truly, which I will cover more in depth in its own video. At the end of the day, using Banshee as she is with no subsume is also perfectly okay, as you will mainly focus on her silence and sonar in any case. If you can't find a subsume to put on her, or if you are just starting out, this build will also work well as is. This one is a little more on the budget end and is without any ability subsumed, and it performs perfectly fine. You can drop the primed mods if you don't have them or just can't afford them yet, and everything else can pretty much remain as is. Because that's the beauty of Banshee, as whatever you decide to subsume on her, it's just extra. Throwing in Molt Augmented and Molt Efficiency are both safe bets as far as arcanes go and are also really accessible. And that's it for Banshee. I realized that after actually playing her, she is a really fun and also very simple frame to learn. That said though, I do believe she is overdue for a little rework, but this is something many players have been saying throughout the years. At least make her sonar highlights work as actual weak points, then we will have more ways in which we can use her comfortably. Even so, she is absolutely worth the try and won't break your bank getting her build together. Thank you so much for watching to the end. As always, if I've missed something or if there are some other crazy synergies that my ADHD brain completely forgot about, put them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe, Tenno, and I shall see you in the next one.